Now, the Russians weren't always called Russians, okay? But you could argue maybe they were, because actually in the Bible, God describes the prince of Rosh. So you did have that term of the Russians, but they were also called the land of Magog, Gog. And there's another name, a biblical name for Russians. Let me show you a scripture that you may find interesting. And it's actually, believe it or not, in the New Testament, of all places. And that is here in Colossians, okay? So in Colossians 3, verse 11, it's talking about in God's church, right? We don't divide people anymore, right? Everyone's one. There's no Greek, there's no Jew, there's no male, there's no female. That's another scripture I'm referring to. It's similar to this one. It says, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. Greek nor Jew. Interesting. So it's talking about Greeks, Jews, the circumcised versus the uncircumcised. Then it chooses to talk about barbarians and Scythians. Ooh, sounds very dramatic. Who are these barbarians? And who are these Scythians? You know, I think of the Sith lords from the Star Wars series. You know, where did they get this term Sith from? You know, where is this? It sounds like a dark term, but where did it actually emanate from? Well, there was a people called the Scythians. And I want to talk to you a little bit about them today because it directly ties into the world war that is happening right now. So let's take a look for a second at the Scythians and see what you think about these guys. All right, so let me get back over where I can show you a little bit about the Scythians here. Okay, so the Scythians were warriors, okay? They were nomadic horse warriors. I'm going to show you a little bit of pictures, and I'm going to show you some little bit of documents on these guys. The Scythians, okay? Very interesting. So they're in the Bible, right? They're in Colossians. And they were known as horse lords, lords of the horses. I mean, they were really the first, many believe, horse warriors. That they predominantly fought on horseback, and their predominant weapon was the bow and arrow. And they were particularly skilled at shooting behind. So they could shoot really from any angle. So they could shoot behind them. While they're riding forward, they could be shooting behind, and they were really accurate at shooting people who were directly behind them, following them either on horseback, or they could surround an army and shoot from any angle. They were really skilled at being horsemen and at being warriors on horse, specifically using the bow and the arrow. These are the Scythians, okay. So let's take a little look at these Scythians, okay, and why they relate directly to what we're talking about, why they relate to biblical prophecy, and why they relate to what's going on in this war today, and ultimately what's going to lead to Jesus' return and us being taken to heaven by him. So you got these Scythians, right? Horse warriors. And they would shoot from horseback. Well, they originated on the steppes of what we call today the steppes of Russia, okay, the western steppes and the eastern steppes. Now, this was an area that was very hard for anyone to live on, and so it was kind of an open area, and they couldn't, you know, no one could really do anything with this land. You know, it was kind of a arid land, a lot of rocky terrain. You know, nothing would really grow there except kind of grasslands. You know, it's kind of like similar. It reminds me, when I saw pictures of it, it kind of reminds me similar of like what you see in Ireland, you know, where you see those grassy kind of rocky hills where you couldn't really live there very well or grow things there, but it's beautiful to look at, but it's not necessarily a very arid land. It's not a place where you could really grow a lot of crops or anything. But these guys came along, and they were the horse warriors, the nomadic horse warriors, and they came along and they started to populate this area that we now know as the steppes of Russia, the Russian territory, right? And according to the historian Herodotus, he believes that they were founded by a man named Scythians, who is supposedly descended from Heracles and a serpent woman. Sounds real nice. I don't know much about this serpent woman, but supposedly Scythians was a descendant, and he was their leader, right? And so the Scythians came into this land, and they spread throughout this territory, and they filled in the area that we now know as Russia. They filled in Iran or Persia of the time, and they spread throughout that entire area, and continued to spread all the way into what we now know as Ukraine as well. So when you hear Putin talking about the Ukraine area being part of Russia, well, originally this is true. I mean, he was right in that it was a conquered territory of the Scythians, was the area of the Ukraine as well. And here's an example of the weapon that they used. It was one of the first composite bows, would actually included horn, sinew, and wood. And it was a compound bow. You know, it was a more effective weapon. And so this is what they would use, and they would travel through the territories, conquering specifically the area of Russia and below, and to the east and to the west, to the east and west. They went into India, and they went into the Ukraine. And guys like, if you can see in this picture, the picture you see there of the Achaemenid Empire, that's actually Cyrus, who we read about in Daniel and in other places in the Bible. That's King Cyrus, who fought against the Scythians, okay? And then also Darius did the same, who came after Cyrus, right? So we know that from Daniel and other places in the Bible. But they had fights with one another and tried to, jockey for land and position and so forth. So he had scuffles with the Persians and the Medes, right? Which we read about in the Bible as well. And these are the Scythians, right? So you're wondering, who are these Russians? Where did they come from? Do we hear about them in the Bible? Well, we do. But they weren't. They were the Prince of Rosh, right, is what's described in Ezekiel. So we do have that name of Rosh or the Russians. But we also knew them as the Scythians. And they were known to be of a lighter skin complexion, like Putin, like you picture Putin. They were a lighter skin complexion, like blue eye, blonde hair, and very pale skin. I mean, Putin is a total example of that, a total pale skin guy, right? I mean, that guy wouldn't last long in the sun at all, right? He's very pale skin. That's how they were. That's how the Scythians look like. And so here you can see in this map, I mean, they covered a large territory the way Russia covers a large territory today. Very similar, right? So, okay, cool. Let me move over here and look a little bit at some of the written history, because I want to share some more about these guys. This also ties into the Bible, and then we're going to look at some scripture and look at some of what's going on in the world. All right, so check this out. And I think I showed you the images I wanted to see. I just want to make sure I covered everything here, because I kind of raced to put this together for you, and so I just want to make sure I cover everything. But let's take a look here some more at who these Scythians were and what they were all about, and kind of how that ties into the conflict that we're seeing now today. Okay, so let me get back over here where I can show you some of that. Okay, so the Scythians just sounds cool, right? The Scythians. All right, so let's check these guys out. So the Scythians, I don't know how well you can read this. Try to zoom in a little bit for you here. But let me just show you this image too. Again, that kind of shows you the same area that we were just looking at. But this is the area known as Scythia. Okay, and you can see the Parthians are right below that, and then Arabia, and so forth. Okay, so Scythia, you can see how it's going into the Ukraine there, right? Okay, so the Scythians were they covered many parts of Russia, and I want to show you specifically a couple things here. So they're on the Russian steppes. Let me see if, and I have so many different files I was looking at that I just want to make sure I cover everything I want to cover here in each of them. But I want to show you an image. I happened to see this image of a Scythian. It was like and hopefully I'll find it here, because I was looking through so many things so quick that I might miss it. But there was this, oh, here it is. I thought this was kind of interesting when it comes to Putin specifically. If you look at this picture here of this guy, check out the guy in the middle on the bottom. All right, I'm gonna back off a little bit here so you can see this. I'm not sure if you can, how well you can see it. Let me go down. Okay, this guy at the bottom, I was looking, I'm like, man, if you put a beard on Putin, okay, and you turn him sideways, that like basically looks just like him. The one that says, I don't know if you can see it, says Saka on the bottom. Let me back off a little bit, but then you might not see his face as well. But I was just checking out these pictures. I'm like, man, that looks just like Vladimir Putin from the side with a beard. I mean, you put a funny hat on him, and notice the shape of their hat too, because we're gonna talk about that. Notice the shape of their hat, how it kind of curves like that. Let's keep that in mind. And so you got this guy. This looks just like Putin, man. If you put a beard on this guy, he turns sideways. It's Putin. Okay, cool. Let's keep going here, because there's a lot of ground I want to cover. All the steps of Russia I want to cover with you today. So, okay, so we're in this land of Scythia, right? And let me just, before I leave this, let me just draw out, make sure I shared everything I wanted to share on this page before I go on. What happened? I clicked something. Oh, I clicked another picture. So that's also Russia, that picture you're seeing right there. So that's a picture of Russia. So it just kind of shows that that's where these guys were. All right, showing me every picture. Let me close this out. Hold on a second. Okay. I think I gotta click this X over here. Thanks for bearing with me. My computer's running a little slow. Okay. All right. So, okay. Just want to show you. So it's Russia, but what's also interesting is it's not just Russia, it's Ukraine as well. Okay, so see, look here. If you see, it says based in what is modern day Ukraine and southern Russia. See that there? Okay, so that's where what they called themselves Skoloti, and were led by a nomadic warrior aristocracy known as the Royal Scythians. Okay, so that's what the Scythians were, is modern day Ukraine and southern Russia. So the conflict we're seeing today, guys, is a conflict of the Scythians. That's what's going on today. It is the Scythians. All right, let me just show you a couple more here on these guys. So that's Scythia, and you can go back and look at this yourself as well. But let me get to a little deeper on these guys, okay? So they were known as these horse warriors, right? So the first thing they were, it says here, they were formidable warriors, all right? So when it talks in Revelation, we're going to look at that in a second, about these warriors going out on horses, right? That's what the Scythians were known for. They were formidable warriors, okay? And number two thing about the Scythians, if we go down a little bit, they were nomads, okay? So they didn't have like their own land, so they're always taking other people's territory. That's part of their deal as being a warrior. And they loved their horses, okay? So the horses was a big, big part of this, guys. So when we see in the Bible, we talking about these horses and horses and horses and horses, it's not necessarily because they're going to be on literal horses. It's because that's who these people are. They're horse people. They're horse lords. They're lords of the horses, horse warriors, right? That's who they are. They're horse warriors. So they ride on horses and they shoot with the bow and arrow. Okay, that's who these Scythians are. That's who they were. So that's their lineage. Okay, that's what they're carrying on. So that's what we see now happening in Russia, is these horse warriors that are now going back into their old territory, Ukraine. But they weren't just horse warriors; they were psychopaths. Okay, all right. They weren't just horse warriors. They were psychotic. So when you looked in there in the Bible where it says barbarians and Scythians, why are they comparing Scythians and barbarians? Well, it's because they were barbaric. However, there's a comparison, right? Because they're not the same. Well, if they were both barbarians, why distinguish the two? It's because the Scythians were a formalized, culturalized, intelligent breed of barbarian. Like They would cut people's heads off, okay? I don't want to get too graphic here, but unfortunately I have to a little bit to tell you how barbaric they are. But they would cut people's heads off, and they would drink their blood. They would literally cut the top of their skull off and use it as a bowl or as a cup. And they found actual skulls with handles. I mean, they went so far as to put handles on these skulls, and they would drink from them of their enemies. And not just any enemy, but their worst enemies. You know, they would... This was kind of the thing they did, like to kind of celebrate their victory. Sounds a little bit like the Chechens, right? The Chechens are the ones kind of leading some of Putin's assault right now into Ukraine. And the Chechens are known for their ruthlessness and their brutalness. And they were part of that area there in Chechnya. That's where the Scythians, and many emanate that that's where the Scythians really like where you still can get the authentic Scythian, right? They haven't mixed in with other Slavic people, but the authentic Scythian is really there in Chechnya. That's the lineage of the psychotic Chechnyan or the ruthless Chechnyan who will just cut your head off and drink the blood. That comes from the Scythians. Okay, guys. So and they believe in that area of Chechnya, Georgia there, that's where you get the authentic Scythian. You want to go back to the real, like, true pure blood Scythian, you're going to go back to there. And they believe the Chechens, they say that the Chechens are one of the oldest people of the area. That's because they're the Scythians, right? And the Scythians are the oldest people of that area. Let's look at a few more. So they were cannibals. So they would eat their victims, drink their blood from their own skulls. Pretty ruthless people. Here it says the Scythian soldier. Again, it's a little graphic, guys. Sorry, but you got to kind of know. You need to kind of know what you're dealing with here. Why they wound up in the Bible, and why God was so significant about these people from the north on their horses with their bows and arrows coming down, and they came down from the north, and that's what they did back in the old days when they fought against, Darius and Cyrus, and they came down. They actually went into, I didn't even share about it on here, but they went into Greece as well, Macedonia. They went down even as far as Africa. So these guys have gotten around, but their main area where they resided was up there in the north. It says here, the Scythian soldiers scrapes the scalp clean of flesh and softening it by rubbing. Now this is Herodotus, a famous historian who was talking about them, okay? Sorry, a little bit graphic. The Scythian soldier scrapes the scalp clean of flesh and softening it by rubbing between the hands, uses it thenceforth as a napkin. Okay, did you get that? He takes their scalp. They would take the scalps of their victims and use them as napkins. Like, what? The Sith is proud of these scalps and hangs them from his bridal rein. The greater the number of such napkins that a man can show, the more highly is he esteemed among them. Many make themselves cloaks by sewing a quantity of these scalps together, such as the Scythian customs with respect to scalps. This is similar to what the Germans did actually during World War II. They would make lampshades and other things, I'll just say, out of the skin of the Jews, the victims during World War II. So there's this psychotic nature of taking your enemies and using their skin and body parts in weird ways, and also even eating them as well. Here's another map of the Scythians, okay? Again, we're in that same territory, Black Sea, Caspian Sea. Crimea was also part of it, Ukraine, and Russia, okay? That's their main area of operation, okay? Let's keep looking here. A few other things. Okay, here's a little bit more about the skull cup. If you want to look at that, I don't want to get too deep in that because it's kind of nasty, but I wanted you to be aware of that. So they were the horse archers, okay? They were famous for this. They originated it, okay? They were the original horse archers, and they perfected that, and we're going to see that biblically as well. Let's look at a few more things here. Okay, Scythian people. Here it can say the Scythians were feared and admired for their prowess in war, and in particular their horsemanship. Okay, so this is very specific to these people. That's why it's important, because you see a lot in the Bible about the horses. And like, what are these horses? We don't even use horses anymore. It's because that's the Scythians. It's directly tied into them. It's part of their culture. It's part of their identity, is this horsemanship that they have, right? And not just the horsemanship. It also talks here about the bow as well. It says their principal weapon was a double curved bow and trefoil-shaped arrows. Their swords were of the Persian type. Again, that was their principal weapon. Now, they did also use swords and other things, but this was what they were known for. They were these horsemen who rode on horseback and could shoot from any direction with their bow and arrow. That's what they're known for. That was their gun. Okay, and that's Russia, right? They're part of southern. Right here it says Central Asia to southern Russia and Ukraine. Southern Russia and Ukraine. You see that? That's exactly where we are now, right? Southern Russia and Ukraine. That's where this war is starting, where World War III is starting. Southern Russia and Ukraine. Now, I want to talk about this. Isn't it interesting that they're called Scythians? Now, have you ever heard of the Sith? Now, again, it sounds like something from a Star Wars series, but the Sith is actually a long blade that harvesters use to harvest crops, is the Sith. Okay? And that's what the Scythians, they're the originators. That's why where the word Sith comes from. It comes from the Scythians. Okay? They were the ones who originated this from King Scythians, or whoever we saw there, that Herodotus said was descended from Heracles and a serpent woman, right? That's where this Sith comes from, guys. We've seen this before, right? The Sith, right? It's what people use to harvest crops. And if you go down here, it actually talks about the Scythians. Show you this. Okay, it says here, according to Jack, Hair and Flesh of the Gods, the ancient Scythians grew hemp and harvested it with a hand reaper that would be considered a Sith, right? They're the ones. That's why it has the name, because it came from the Scythians. They're the ones who originated this instrument that's used for harvesting. Okay? Now, keep that in mind. It's a harvesting tool. Okay? Now, God is Lord of the harvest, right? And we're waiting for God to harvest us and take us to heaven, right? So is it any coincidence that God would use the harvesters, the Scythians, the people known for, they probably used a tool like this to cut their enemies' heads off too. I mean, maybe that's where the Sith really became known, because where else do we know about this Sith, right? Anybody? If you hadn't thought about it already, you'll think about it now. The Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper, guys, is known as the bearer of the Sith. He's the one who harvests with the Sith. It's the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper, of all people. So think about this, right? When we read in Revelation that God is bringing the harvest and he's bringing death and doom and destruction, he's bringing in the Scythians, the Grim Reapers, the guys who cut your skull off and drink the blood. That's who he's bringing in, guys. The Grim Reaper. Why did the Grim Reaper, of all the tools the Grim Reaper could have had, he could have had a spear, could have had an axe, could have had a lot of things, but he has a Sith of all things because he's harvesting. It's the harvest, guys. It's the harvest of the dead. He's harvesting us. And some get harvested to eternal life, and some get harvested to eternal death, right? That's the Grim Reaper. All right. But it's not over yet, okay? The Sith versus the sickle, okay? What's the difference? Well, there isn't much. The only difference is how long the stick is, right? A sickle is kind of a handheld Sith, right? The sickle and the Sith, right? You see that? See the difference? They're both curved blades on a stick. The Sith is a little bit longer. The sickle is shorter, the handheld version, right? It's like a knife versus a sword, right? That's the difference between the Sith and the sickle. Well, where else do we see the sickle? Does that ring a bell to anybody out there? That's right. USSR. The Soviet Union. Russia. The Sith. The sickle. It's right there on their flag. Where do you think that sickle came from? You think they just stuck a sickle on there for fun? It's because they're Scythians, guys. They're descendants of the Sith. The Scythians. That's who they are. That's who the Russians are. That's who the Ukrainians are. That's why their flag had a hammer and a sickle, or Sith, right on it. It's because that is their history. That is their heritage. They are the Scythians. And it's right on the flag of the former Soviet Republic. Can you believe that? Wow. That blows my mind. Okay. So, but we're not done yet. We're still going here. We're just getting rolling because I haven't even gotten to the Bible on this yet. Okay. Look at a pruning hook. The pruning hook, right? Very similar shape again. This curved blade. Remember what God says, and we're going to read that here in a second. In fact, I'll just wait till we read it. Keep that in mind. The pruning hook, very similar. Okay. Oh, they changed it, but I just wanted to give you a sense of here. If you look there up to the right, you can see where Moscow is. You can see where Kiev is in Ukraine, right? And if I click on it, you'll kind of see where it is. Okay, there's Kiev, and then here's Moscow over here, right? So again, and there's the steppes of Russia. That's where the Sith. That's where the Scythian. That's where the Sith originated. That's where the sickle and the hammer came out of. That's the battle we have going on today. It's the harvesters. It's the harvest. It's the reapers going out to reap, both to life and to death. And God is always using, just like he did back, just like he did in 2016 when he put the last Trump in office, the blonde-haired, pale-skinned, you could argue, man who maybe even has Russian roots. I'm not sure what his heritage is, but there's a symbolism there in the name, right? I even thought when you had the vice president with him, it sounded like trumpets. Put the last name. I can't say too much, unfortunately, here, but put the last name of one with the other, and it sounds like trumpets. So, the last trump, right, was sounded, and that's kind of what's going on here. I think God is, he's always using symbolism. He's always using metaphor. He's always using parable. There's always a connection. And now you've got these Scythians, these reapers, right? The grim reapers, the people who carry the Sith, the ones who cut the skulls off and drink the blood on their horses with their bows, and they're going out to conquer. Guys, this is amazing. This is mind-blowing. And this is something God had planned thousands of years ago, before today, and it's all being carried out right in front of us. So I just want to remind you of some of these maps. We've looked at this before, but again, there's Rosh, there's Magog, the land of Rosh, the prince of Rosh, the land of Magog, the land of the Scythians, and they are the ones now carrying out God's prophecies. Okay, let's take a look here in Ezekiel, right? So in Ezekiel 39, it says, "Son of man, prophesy against Gog and say," this is what the sovereign Lord says, "I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Rosh." Okay, you see that? Prince of Rosh? Okay, it's right in the Bible, right in Ezekiel 39. It's the prince of Rosh specifically. It's Russia, guys. That's what it is. Okay, and you could argue that Putin is kind of a prince, because the guy's been in power for, 20 years now? And he's not your regularly elected, democratically elected president. He's a guy who's wielded his way to stay in power for 20 years and will continue to do so. So he has become a bit of a prince. And I think prince is an appropriate term because he wasn't crowned king, right? A prince is someone who's just looking to get the throne, So prince is kind of an appropriate term. And he's the prince of Rosh. So I think it's appropriate. Now you could argue that may be a spiritual, the prince, being the prince of darkness behind him as well, but no question, he is a little prince there, and I think it's an appropriate term. So you got the prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. He says, "I will turn you around and drag you along. I will bring you from the far north and send you against the mountains of Israel." Now, in another spot, I think we'll see it here. He says, "I put a hook in your mouth," and I think it's interesting. Again, God always used these terms that kind of related to the culture. He kind of like playing on words. He would play on words about who they were, right? These are people who used the hook, who used the scythe, the sickle, who used the pruning hook. He would put the hook in their mouth and turn them around and drag them down. He says, "Then I will strike your bow from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals." Okay, let's keep going here. So I got some other stuff I want to show you that relates to this. Okay, here it is, Ezekiel 38. Okay, "I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed. Well, what are they armed with? They're armed with the bow and arrow. It's the Scythians on the horsemen. Why are the horses so important? You know, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Now, they did also have swords. I didn't share about that here, but they did also have different weapons that they used that were swords as well. And you can check out, I got some of those images from a documentary that's online, so you can check that out. But they did have swords, but their primary weapon was the horse combined with the bow and arrow, right? And it says Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, right? And we know this to be, we know about Persia, right? That they were also part of the original Scythians. Cush and Put, that's down in Africa. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Gomer in Turkey area. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And Beth Togarmah from the far north, guys. So this isn't just like Syria. God's not talking about north of Israel, right? We're talking about the far north and all its troops and the many nations with you. Okay? So again, he's put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army. Again, I think he's playing on words there about the Sith. Okay? The hooks in the jaws. All right, let's take a look here. I want to show you kind of how this ties in a little bit with Revelation. Now, in Revelation 14, it's kind of interesting, and then we'll look at a couple others. Well, actually, before we look at Revelation 16, let's look at, let's see if I got it open here. Let's look at Revelation 6. Okay, so Revelation 6, right? So we got this description, and it's all these horses. And, you know, what's with all the horses? Why are horses referred to? In fact, let's look at this first, because here's like all the times that horses appears in the Bible, right? And Ezekiel, it's in Zechariah, right? We see this story of these different horses, red, brown, and white horses in the myrtle trees, right? And the red, he's talking about the red horse. Well, we see that again in Revelation 6, right? And why is the horse so important? He says, I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying in a loud voice like thunder, come. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown. Given a crown. Does that have to do with the Prince of Rush being crowned for this event? Is God crowning him now to be the conqueror, to be the one who brings in the end times, who brings in the tribulation, brings in God's return by beginning World War III? Is that what God is crowning him for? It says, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. You know, and that's kind of what, you know, I want to hopefully get to. Oh, okay. I think my video finally came through. Let me see if I can share this. Well, let me finish sharing this, and then I'll play this video for you, because it's kind of interesting, revealing. It's Putin's related to Putin. So let me go back over here and just finish up the scriptures. Okay, so he's talking about these horses, right? And then when the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, come. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the living creature say, come. And I looked, and there before me was a black horse, and its rider was holding a pair of scales in the hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and wine. When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, come. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So again, we've got these horses going out. But it's very interesting, specifically this conqueror who goes out with the bow on the horse, because that is the way of the Scythians. Now, let me talk a little bit about this sickle, or the Grim Reaper, right, in Revelation 14, okay? So in Revelation 14, he says, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand, right? Now, this word sickle, if you look at it, let me see. Where are you, sickle? Okay, sharp sickle. Okay, it's drepanon. So it says a sickle or a pruning hook, a hooked vine knife, such as reapers and vine dressers use. Well, we know what they use. They use a scythe, right? And they use a sickle, right? We know about that. and a gathering hook, a sickle. And we know where that was invented. That was invented in the land of the Sith by the Scythians, right? They were the ones who originated this tool that has become used and become known as the Sith, and was even found on their flag. And so it says that, as it's talking about Jesus sitting on the throne, right, the Son of Man, with a sharp sickle or scythe in his hand, you could say. Then another angel came out of the temple and called out in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle," or your scythe, "and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So God could be using the Scythians, the reapers, as his sickle, right? It's just something to think about. I'm just throwing these ideas out there, right? Now, there's a spiritual side to it. Obviously, the angels are going to come and take us to heaven, but there's also sort of the physical side. There's a lot of parallels. God is always paralleling everything, right? So you think he's sending out these Scythians, the ones who wield the Sith, the reapers, and he's sending them out, and that's what he's saying. It's like he swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. So it's almost symbolic that he sends these guys out to kind of initiate this harvest time. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia, which is 300 kilometers, 180 miles, okay? So this is the harvest, right, that God is going to do. Now, some argue this may even be part of the arpazo that's being described here, that there's kind of the first half is the wheat that he's putting into his barn, and then the second half is the part that gets trampled on as high as the horses' bridles. And again, he's bringing in the horses again, the horses' bridles. So this is connection between the horses, the sickle or the scythe, and the bow, right? We're seeing that the bow and arrow. They're seeing a lot of connection with that here, and this is one more time that we're seeing that as well.